Welcome to the Homeward Bound podcast by the Mortgage Guys, your ultimate guide to navigating home buying and mortgage lending. Whether you're searching for your first home or settling into your forever home, we're here to make the journey simple, clear, and exciting, helping you secure your dreams one home at a time.
All right, everybody, welcome back to another episode of our podcast for the Mortgage Guys. We're grateful you guys are here listening to us today, and got some exciting things we're going to talk to you about. I'm Dave Loescher, and we have Kyle Torgerson and Myles Anderton, and we're going to talk about some more things that we deal with on a daily basis. But before we do, I want to turn some time over to Kyle to thank our sponsors, specifically the sponsor for this episode.
We want to recognize one of our sponsors that we've previously recognized, but they do a fantastic job for us. They support us. They're locally owned and operated. That is Legacy Flooring. Legacy Flooring is here on the southern part of town, and they do hardwood to carpet to laminate tile, anything you need, and their installation is top-notch. Shower surrounds, they do it all. And so I'd highly recommend you check them out if you're in the market to getting some new flooring to replace that old ratty stuff, or if you're building a new home, they are a perfect suggestion to go look at. One of the things that Rob, their main salesman over there, always tells me is that, you know, the big box stores, they don't have the selection, and and Legacy is way cheaper with a quality product. And so definitely grateful for our awesome sponsor, Legacy Flooring, here in Cedar City, Utah.
Yeah, and as far as being personable, I don't think you can get a better group of people.
They're fantastic.
When you go in there and work with them, they're so personable. But anyway, with that, we're going to go ahead and dive into our next item that we're going to discuss here. And it has to do with something called locking, right? I mean, that's something we deal with all the time, but it's about locking some interest rates. We've kind of brainstormed here collectively as a group. We brainstormed some of the most common questions that will kind of help this podcast flow. And I'm just going to go throw the first one out here, and we'll just all kind of roundtable discuss a little bit and take turns going through these. But first off, what does it mean to lock a mortgage rate? How does that process work? What is a rate lock? Anybody want to take a stab at that?
I'll take that one if that's okay. So the interesting thing is, and those that have had mortgages probably experienced it, as soon as their lender closes their loan, it's usually sold. And they get their servicing done through somewhere else. And so your original lender doesn't hold your note. That's actually sold to another company. And so we work with that company when somebody says, I want to lock my mortgage rate. We'll talk about what that means exactly, but we're essentially negotiating with that purchaser of that note to deliver a loan to them at a specific rate and price. Mm-hmm. And when we do that, that becomes the mortgage rate for that loan. And as we know, mortgage rates change every day, sometimes multiple times a day. But it's kind of interesting to watch that. I know that is quite a big stress factor for us every day, especially today.
Yeah, for sure. And then as far as how that process works, I mean, Myles, when you get the green light to lock, how do you do that?
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty, as soon as someone gives us the green light, we lock that thing as quick as possible, because obviously, like Kyle was saying, we don't know what's happening in the market. It could go up instantly. And so, you know, that's it. The process is pretty easy. Mm-hmm. We just have to, people have to say, yeah, I'm ready to lock, and we get it done. Yeah. And, you know, that lock can last, it lasts for the life of the loan, right? As long as it closes on time and things. And we'll kind of go into that with another question, but there's certain lock time frames and stuff that are applicable to when you're purchasing a home. But overall, you know, it's a quick and easy process. Hopefully it's easy for them. And that's the goal, right?
So I had a discussion yesterday with a borrower that wanted to lock, and it was after hours, and it was 6 p.m. or so our time. And I've been waiting for his response, indicated, the rate is this, and we've been conversing back and forth. And then he kind of slowed down and didn't respond for a little while. And luckily the rates hadn't changed, but he sent a text back and said, yeah, I want to lock that rate. And so it's able to submit that to our lock desk, or our secondary market team that negotiates with these other, wholesale and lending types. And with that, they're able to say, yep, this rate is locked. This is what it is. And that's the fixed rate for that borrower. But one of the questions that the borrower had was like, do I need to come in? Do I need to sign something? I said, no, your approval is just enough. And I was able to roll with it from that. So it's really simple to lock a rate. And it gives us the ability to talk with the borrower, share some examples of what that rate does to their payment. Mm-hmm. We can work different scenarios, and they can negotiate buying points down. We're not really going to be talking about buying points. We have in previous episode, but what that payment is adjusted with that rate.
Yeah, for sure. And it's really a quick process. Like you said, their word is good. If they say lock, we lock. Yeah. And once we do, it's kind of, I've always used the analogy a little bit with our borrowers just to kind of make it into simple terms. It's like, if you're interested in buying a stock, that stock is constantly moving, right? I mean, the stock market, the daily price, it's moving throughout the day. When they make the decision to pull the trigger and buy that at that dollar figure, it's the same way when they lock in interest rate. They need to be prepared to not look back. And that's a hard thing sometimes. And if you're analyzing the market, you can drive yourself crazy analyzing it. If you tell us to lock, we're going to lock it in, screw it down, don't look back. That's my biggest advice I'd say there. But, we have some more questions here on opposite of locking. Want to ask about that one?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, when it comes to locking, there's also some other terminology, but what does it mean to float a rate or floating? And what does it mean? When might that be a good strategy? It's a good question.
Yeah. I think on that one, I'd like to say a few words on that. Floating is definitely, I think for us as loan officers, it's oftentimes the right thing to do, right? But it certainly gives us a little bit of, I don't want to say stress, because it's our job. Our job does carry some stress. Every job does. But when someone's floating, we definitely need to be on our A game, paying attention to what's going on in the market. So basically, in layman's terms, what is floating? Floating is doing anything except locking. That's the best way I think I can put it is if we're not going to lock you in on a rate, you are floating the market. You are waiting for a better time to float or to lock in. So there are risks that come with that. There's a lot of risks that come with it. The market could go up and it could go down. So,
yeah, it always makes me think of, a boat on the water and that the waves are kind of taking it up and down. And that's what rates are doing. They're going up, they're going down. And that's what your rate's doing that you haven't locked yet, right? And so once you lock it, it's fixed. It's not floating anymore. It's not budging.
Yeah, it's kind of like being. It's a good analogy. I like to fish. I'm a bass fisherman. And I've got a little bass boat, and I'll sit there, and it never fails to get that big wakeboarder that comes by, pushing that giant wake because their ballasts are full, and they're jerks. But anyway, they come by, and all of a sudden, my little bass boat, I'm up on top of one of those big wakes, and that big wakeboarder. Sorry for you wakeboarders out there. I know it's a fun activity, but it's just like the market. The market can be that giant wakeboard boat. Something big hits, and all of a sudden that wave gets higher, that rate gets higher, and it's definitely not fun when that happens.
So, I mean, we're talking about the rates going up and down like this, and of course that's a function of the market. So our third question is, what market factors influence interest rates daily or weekly? And we're seeing a lot of daily adjustments. Right now, there's a lot of trade and tariff talk. The Fed is meeting quite frequently. We weekly get information about, where's the jobs, where's our unemployment, what's our inflation doing, and all of these have a massive global adjustment to not only interest rates but all of our markets, right? The NASDAQ, the Dow, they're all moving too, and bonds are tied, or rates are tied to a bond market. And so just like the stock market, interest rates are fluctuating with this information that comes in quite frequently also. And we try to look ahead. We try to figure out when those big market moving days are going to happen. We don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
But one thing that's really nice is when you get a loan officer that's aware of those adjustments. Yeah. I was able to lock that borrower yesterday. I'm sure glad we did, because there was some new information that came out today that rocked the market pretty hard. And that's always great when you can pay attention and lock preemptively to some market data that could hurt.
Yeah. How often have you heard, Myles, the Fed lowered the rate?
Oh, I mean, we get that conversation every day, right?
Mortgage rates must be amazing now, right?
Yeah, and we all wish that it was that way, but it doesn't follow the Fed rate, and no. It is one of those interesting things. Just like Kyle was saying, a lot of it has to do with the other things rather than just what the Fed is doing. It does have a little bit of effect on it, but overall, the economy, the bond market, things like that have a lot bigger effect on it. But yeah, we get that question every day, right?
Almost all the time, especially when the Fed meets. And I think it's the biggest thing about this is we're anticipatory. We talked about this one time before. We're already taking in, our secondary department's already taking in, and they're anticipating what is going to happen with the Fed's adjustment. And the bond market is very anticipatory as well. So these things, we're not going to dive super deep into this. We'll save that for another episode with somebody that's a little bit smarter than the three of us. But we'll dive into that a little bit further later. But there's a lot of factors that influence. And I think the biggest thing is we are having to stay on our toes and watch for news, economic news. And that's the jobs reports. That's all the GDP, anything that moves GDP, anything that moves the economy typically will move equities and bonds. And we're so tied to the bond market and this with mortgage-backed securities, it's going to move things. So as long as we are doing our responsibility as lenders, as loan officers, and paying attention to what reports are coming out on what days and what it looks like, we can kind of do our best to predict, I guess.
Yeah.
We never really know for sure. And then we're to be good stewards of our clients and just be able to say, you know what, it looks like things could do this or that, or they did this. What do you want to do? But ultimately, back to the lock and rate, we leave it up to the borrowers, right? We kind of have to.
We do, and it makes me think of, financial advisors. They do their best to look at historical trends, to analyze and predict what might happen. Now, their crystal ball is just about as awesome and accurate as ours is, and they don't know, and we do our best to try to know just like they do. But ultimately, our job isn't to talk people into rates. We are advisors, and we talk with our borrowers to make sure that they're comfortable with it, that it's going to meet their budget and needs. And if it does, we facilitate and help them do that. But only that. We're never going to force anybody to lock a rate, even if we think they should and they decide they don't want to.
Yeah.
Okay. And it's your loan, and we'll do whatever you want us to do. But that's what they're hiring us to do, essentially, is to be that advisor. And that's why it's really important to find loan officers that do that. There's a lot of loan officers that are order takers. They simply say, "You want to lock? Great. You don't? Great." It doesn't matter to them.
Yeah.
But I know in our branch with us, it's highly important for us to know what our borrowers' needs are and look out for their best interest.
It's easy to see, we sometimes get those borrowers that get pretty emotionally tied to this, right? I mean, they can sit there and look at it and think, I got to hit the best timing. and granted, you want to do your due diligence and try to stay on top of it. But, I had a recent borrower that was daily. They wanted daily updates. What does it look like today? What does it look like today as we continued to float? And that brings up the next question. What are the risks of waiting to lock in a rate? What are the risks if you just keep floating? And sometimes people can get a little bit too analytical, apprehensive, not able to pull that trigger. And it can have some risks, right?
Yeah, I was actually thinking to that as we were talking, just barely. We're in a strange market, and we have been for the last couple years, honestly.
Yeah.
Right? When I first started in mortgage, daily rate changes were not really a thing. Like, it was very, very seldom that a rate would change in the middle of the day. Mm-hmm. And now we have that happen a lot.
Several times
several times a day now, right? And so that's kind of the risk that you take with not locking right now. And to be honest, and you guys have talked about it on previous episodes, but 1/8% isn't going to affect your payment that much, and so that risk, it's just nice to know that you're locked, you're good, and you're not going to have to worry about it anymore, because in reality, we don't know what's going to happen. And even if it drops a little bit, it's not going to help you or hurt you that much. And so anything that you can do to kind of help yourself avoid that risk, it's better, I think. But like Kyle said, we're not forcing you into anything, but it is a risk.
Yeah.
And we live in a weird market right now.
Yeah. Well, it's a good point, Dave, that you made this emotional, because, let's face it, 6.5 sounds a whole lot better than 6.6. It just does.
For some reason.
Even though that adjustment is like this, it's minuscule. It doesn't make or break anything in your budget. Emotionally, it just feels better.
Yeah.
It's awesome.
And everybody wants that ability. We talked earlier about having bragging rights at the next soccer game with your kids or dinner party or whatever it is. And say, ooh, I got 6.5.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's definitely a little bit different there.
I think one of the points, and we've talked about it in other episodes too, the risks of waiting outweigh the benefits, in my opinion, right now, just because in reality, with the way that rates are, you're probably going to try and refinance in the next few years too, right? And so that brings up a whole nother topic, but in reality, the risk is just there to raise your rate when you could lock in and be safer. And so it's kind of one of those hard points too. And so you have to look at that factor as well. And that's kind of what we try and do every day, right? Is try to teach them and say, hey, like, this isn't going to hurt you because you're probably going to refi here in the next 2 years or whatever that looks like.
Sure. So I'll just ask this next one real quick. There's different lock periods, and I think that's one of the things we need to ask right now is what's the difference, during these, in a standard being 30 days, we also have 45 days, we have 60 days. What are the risks and costs involved? Not really risk, but the costs involved with that. So let's talk a little bit, guys, about these different lock periods and why we have them and why they're out there and who it might be a good fit for.
I think a really important thing to point out to start this little bit of conversation is that we can't close your loan. We can't even final approve your loan until that rate is fixed and locked, right?
Yep.
And so it's important to get that part of it done. But what you're leading to is, how much time do we need? Are you selling a home? And do you need to sell that home before you can buy this other home? And how much time do you need to sell that home and buy this other home? Mm-hmm. Is it 30 days? Is it 45 days? Is it 60 days or even longer? We have the ability to lock those rates out. And so we want to modify whatever that lock is to whatever the borrower needs. But those locking periods are fixed. If you're doing a 30-day lock, we've got 30 days to deliver that loan, essentially, a locked loan to that investor. Now, does that mean that if you're going 33 days or even 37 days that we got to start over? Thank goodness, no. We have the ability to extend those locking periods, but there's a per diem, and that's based on your loan amount, the amount of time that you need to extend to. And so that's an added cost. It's not going to make or break your budget, but it is there. And so your lender is going to talk to you about, to extend it 3 days is going to be this much. To extend it 10 days, it's going to be this much. And so if you're expecting a 40-day, you shouldn't go with a 30-day, go with 45. Yeah.
And I've seen cases where we get, especially into this time of the year, in April, typically March, April, where someone may be waiting on a tax return. In order to verify enough income, they're self-employed, we need that tax return. And that CPA is taking a little bit longer because they're busy. Unfortunately, this is just one of many examples where it can take you beyond that 30-day or that 45, whatever you were locked. And sometimes the per diem can get a little bit out of control. And it's always a little bit unfortunate when it goes beyond not just 2, 3, 4, 5 days, when it really gets beyond 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 days, and that per diem really starts costing. And we have to charge the borrower for those. Those are expensive. Those lock extensions, once you get beyond 10 days, is really expensive, and you really should have. Maybe we should have went with that next period. Mm-hmm. Because right now in our market, right now in our economy, our 30 and our 45 days are pretty much the same rate. Yeah, it's pretty much the same exact lock. Really, you get into the 60-day, and that's where it kind of starts creeping up. And then the 90 is even more, and then the 120, 150, and it keeps going all the way to 360. We have the ability, and we use them with our construction loans, is to lock for a year, and that gives them time to build the home. Mm-hmm. And that's valuable. But you're locking at basically a premium. You're locking at a higher interest rate than current market the further out you go. And there's a reason for that, because there's risk involved. They're having to hedge the market. They're having to do what they need to do to make it still profitable for that long term. So timing is everything.
Yes,
it really is. And paying attention to what it is that has to come together before that loan can close, and just be honest with yourself. I think we as lenders need to be able to do that negotiation and that conversation with the borrower and say, let's be honest, how quickly can we get this thing done? And usually we can close deals in 3 weeks, but there's some other things involved, like you said, selling a home, getting your tax returns, whatever it might be. Let's be realistic.
And that's why it's important to get your lender the purchase agreement as soon as possible too, right? So those conversations can be had. Because in reality, we don't know until we have the purchase agreement and that realtor wrote it up for 3 weeks and you still have to sell a home or something. We can have that conversation then so that we know what's going to work best too. Which kind of leads us into the next question here. But just to ask you guys, is there ever a time that a borrower or buyer should definitely lock their rate without hesitating?
Yeah. I'm thinking of timing primarily. I had a deal a couple weeks ago where another lender just couldn't perform on it, and we picked it up with 14 days left. Mm-hmm. And I said, okay, we got to move fast then. We got to just hit the ground running. And we locked immediately. And that was just one big hurdle that we got out of the way. The rate was good enough where the borrower wasn't concerned about it. met their budget. Everything was right. And so we just got that out of the way as quickly as possible. We also have those, and that was that situation, but we also have those days where rates take an awesome dip. Mm-hmm. And we're looking at our historical data and saying rates haven't been this low for 6 months. Mm-hmm. We better see what we can do to lock this in. And those are few and far between. They do come up.
Yep.
I think when you're within, I'd say 2 weeks of closing.
Yeah.
I mean,
it's time.
Floating makes sense often.
Yeah.
But really, it's like you said, when we get to the point where we have to get it locked so we can do that closing disclosure and that last disclosure and get it in front of underwriters to close this thing up, wrap it up, get docs drawn.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of like, you're planning a wedding. You got to decide what it is you're going to be eating. You got to make that decision on what you're going to be cooking or getting catered. Yep. You can't just wait until the day of the wedding and go, okay, it's going to be boom.
Yeah.
You need to plan ahead, giving enough time so that we can lock that before closing. So to answer your question, Myles, when is it? Should they definitely lock? I'd say whether 10 to 14 days before closing. Let's get that locked so we can get what we need closed up, docs to title, and get that thing wrapped up. I think one thing to point out here is, like you said, economic things can come into it, and that's true. Mortgage rates typically rates in general, the Fed rate, mortgage rates, whatever it is, rates are increased as a tool to kind of deal with inflation. And Myles, you said earlier, this has been a weird market the last 2 to 3 years. Well, we've also had inflation, 3-4 years ago, that have been kind of higher than normal. Mm-hmm. So they've had to raise interest rates to combat inflation, and that's what's been going on. So when we have something that comes out in the market that is definitely indicative of rising inflation, well, you can kind of think more than likely rates are going to climb. So maybe now is a good time to lock that rate because we're in one of those little lows, whatever.
That actually kind of works into our next question. What tools or strategies do we have as lenders to help people make good decisions in locking a rate? I think we're pretty good about watching the market. Out of my 3 screens that I have in my office, one is always the bond market, the mortgage-backed securities market. And I'm keeping a good eye on that. I know you do the same. And we're looking at trends. We're looking at data. It's nice to be able to have, when clients come in or real estate agents that come in, be able to show them we're not making this up. This is what's real. This is what's happening. This is what I expect to happen. And, those are important. We get rate alerts on our phones. What other tools do we kind of look at?
I think the program that we use, the 3 of us use the same one here, which is awesome. It gives us, it's real time. It's like watching the ticker on the stock market. You can see what it's doing all the time. You can see it immediately react to news. And that gives us an edge because we also have that app on our phone and the notifications that come through. But one thing I was going to add is we have a pretty good opportunity weekly with the company that we work with at Premier, where we get to listen to our head of secondary. He kind of digests that stuff, and we sit on a call with him, and he tells us basically, he kind of digests a lot of that economic information, puts it in layman's terms for us, and tells us this is what's going on, and this is what we have on the horizon coming out this week as far as some economic reports and why these things should be paid attention to. And that's kind of valuable for us because we can, once we have that, we kind of have that ammunition and we're loaded so that we can, be prepared.
Yeah. And maybe this isn't necessarily a tool, but in my mind, it's one of the things that we use to lock, and that's dates on a purchase agreement, right? Right. That's not necessarily a tool to know the rate, but it is a tool to know when we need to lock.
Yeah.
Because we look at all the dates, there's a few different dates on the purchase agreement, and we have to make sure that we're on those. Mm-hmm. And if we're not, everyone's going to be mad in the transaction because we're going to miss them. Yeah. And so it's important, right? We have to know when financing and appraisal deadline is done, and we have to be locked so that we can make sure that we're ready to close within the next week or so. And so it's not necessarily a tool, but it is something that we have to look at and pay attention to a lot.
Yeah. And I get a lot of people that ask me, what app do you use or what software do you use? And it's available to us. We pay a subscription for it, but one thing that anybody can use is the 10-year Treasury bond.
Yeah,
that's an awesome barometer to know what is happening with the mortgage market as the T-bond or the Treasury bond goes up. So do rates, and vice versa. We love seeing that T-bond go down.
Yeah.
It makes our day.
Yeah, we watch the yields on that all the time, and it's kind of interesting to use that historic graph of that 10-year. on those yields, and you can sit there and almost add a certain amount over that, and you can find what historic interest rates have been. They follow that as the index, and then you have the margin over, but it's really, really accurate. And I think one of the things I want to talk about now is we'll visit on what's called a float down option. I think it's important to say right here on your standard vanilla garden variety rate locks, your 30 and 45 days, which most of our rate locks are, right, for a purchase transaction or a refinance, they don't have what we're talking about here, which is a float down. Kyle, I'm going to pick on you a little bit because you just dealt with one of these yesterday. What is a float down? When do you see it? How does it work?
It's a pretty awesome tool. You know, we talked about locking a rate extended for up to a year. Mm-hmm. And you're hedging against the market, which means that the investor wants a little more yield for their risk and maybe delivering a loan way down the road. And so they want to be compensated for that risk. And so the rate it's higher.
Yeah, over market,
yeah. And so for this case, a 360-day lock was about 1% over market at the time, which is pretty standard for a year rate lock. But something unique to those extended rate locks is if you're converting to that long-term loan sooner, you get to shorten that rate lock, and it means you get to float it down, which means that maybe we were locked at this rate way up here, and because we're delivering that loan sooner, we get to float it down to, in yesterday's example, was a 0.5% adjustment down, which I'm pretty sure my borrower was doing a happy dance, knowing that they had a 0.5% adjustment, which is material, right? An eighth is not maybe material, but a 0.5% is a pretty good adjustment. And so they were pretty excited about that. You know, sometimes those extended rate locks are just not necessary. In a construction scenario. It absolutely is, but those extended rate locks, even up to 90 days, we can have a float down option, which is cool.
You know, and it's kind of good to look at those things. Those extended rate locks are kind of a worst case scenario is really what they are. You're locking in a little bit above market rate for that longer lock, and it's really a fallback. You're not going to be any worse than this, but more than likely when you're within 30 days of closing this loan, or modifying the transaction, we're going to be able to float you down to, somewhere near market rate in that 30 days prior. And generally speaking, a float down is that you float down. You're not floating up. You're floating down, and it improves.
How cool is that? I mean, we were able to offer a 1 year rate lock, and this is like borrower. This is the worst scenario you could possibly have, and it can only get better from here. I mean, we get them to the ceiling. They don't have to worry about what's going to happen in the market. It's done. They don't have to worry about it. It can only get better.
Yeah, because you think about the opposite, right? If rates were to be 9% today, and they locked in at 8%, they would be pretty happy with that long-term lock.
Yep.
I think in terms of our questions, I think we have one more all-encompassing question that we really need to touch on. I think one of the ones we had here, not so applicable, but this one I believe is really good, and that's going to be, I'm going to ask both you guys to answer this one if you wouldn't mind. What advice would you give a first-time home buyer that's nervous about locking at the wrong time? Because those that have been through the process before, they kind of feel like they're already, loaded. They know when to lock. They know how to watch the market. They know what to ask. But we're really trying to cater to the first-time home buyer. They don't know when. They're kind of apprehensive. They're kind of relying on you guys. You're the pros, right? So what advice would you give to a first-timer that's nervous about knowing when to lock?
That's a great question. I think, when it comes to locking, you don't need to be nervous. Because really, it's not, especially if you have a good lender, right? Especially if you have a good loan officer that's walking you through the process. And if they're not, make sure you're asking questions for them and making sure that they are listing it out and explaining it to you, because it shouldn't be a nervous thing. It shouldn't be something that you're scared to lock because you don't know what's going to happen. You should have confidence in your lender and in your loan officer that they're going to get you the very best thing possible, and they're going to make it work. And so in my mind, you shouldn't be nervous. And if you are, that might be a red flag somewhere else. And so ask some more questions, get to know a little bit more about it, and so that you're not nervous.
One thing, and I've shared with my borrowers plenty of times, so this is like buying a stock. If you're comfortable with the price, it's time to go all in, both feet. But I mean, timing the market is pretty cool if you can do it, but I don't even think Warren Buffett knows how to do that. He does a pretty dang good job, obviously, but at the same time, if you're comfortable and it's going to fit your budget, it's time to lock.
Yeah, and I think we need to talk again about emotions. I mean, it's really easy to get caught up in the numbers of the interest rate. And what is that 1/8%, that 0.125? what does it really do to the payment? And we talked about this before. Oftentimes it's anywhere from $12 to $18 per eighth on your monthly payment. Does that add up? Yeah, over time it does. But if you're going to refinance this loan anyway in 2 to 5 years, which most people will, is that extra $12 a month really worth losing sleep over, getting, feeling anxiety? And I think the theme here is and you said it perfectly, if you have a good lender that's staying on top of it and communicating with you, we got you. We're gonna make recommendations. We're gonna give you the information. You need to make the choice, but we're gonna try to work with you and keep you informed and really don't get too caught up in it. I think that's the best advice.
Yeah, I think in wrapping up, rate lock, it feels like a lender lingo. Ultimately, we're just talking about your rate. What are you comfortable with, and don't worry about the lingo. Have a good lender that's got your back.
Yeah.
Enough said. I like it.
Yep. I love it.
Right.
I agree. I think that's about what it comes down to, right? Is just trusting that you're going to be okay.
Yeah.
Because in reality, the lock it shouldn't be a scary thing, but we are locking your rate, and it is a good thing because then you're taken care of for however long you have that mortgage. You don't have to worry about your interest rate jumping up, right? There used to be adjustable rates used to be a huge thing, and now they're not so much a big thing. And so if you have a fixed rate and you're locked in, you can sleep at night knowing that it's not going to change.
Definitely, you can budget with it. Well, thanks, guys. This was something that I think we kind of needed to discuss because it comes up all the time, locking and floating, and what is it? So hopefully everybody found it useful. If you guys out there, if you have any questions, if anything comes up, please comment. If you're watching on YouTube, make a comment. If you're listening to it on a audio podcast, feel free to reach out to any one of us. We're here to answer any questions you might have, and we appreciate you tuning in.